7 words shattered Penelope's world. You've just let yourself go too much. Dumped in a crowded high-end restaurant purely for her size, she never expected her tear-stained exit to catch the eye of Chicago's most ruthless crime syndicate boss. Now her shallow ex is on his knees, begging for his life. Penelope Miller sat across the table from the man she had loved for 4 years, her fingers trembling so badly she had to hide them beneath the heavy linen tablecloth. The restaurant Le Petit Chien was suffocatingly pretentious. The clinking of crystal glasses and the hushed, arrogant murmurs of the city's elite felt like a mocking soundtrack to her impending heartbreak. Derek Harrington, dressed in a sharp-tailored navy suit that likely cost more than Penelope's monthly rent, didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye. He was busy adjusting his Rolex, a gift she had purchased for his promotion last year. I just don't think we align anymore. Peptonafua. Derek said, his voice carrying that practiced corporate smoothness he used when closing a hostile real estate deal. My career is taking off. I need a partner who fits into this new world, someone who looks the part. Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. She was a fat woman. She had always been fat. A solid size 22, she carried her weight unapologetically, pouring her energy into her rapidly growing artisanal bakery crumb and canvas. Derek had met her when they were both broke college students, eating cheap noodles on her sagging couch. He used to say he loved her curves, loved her softness, loved that she was real. Looks the part, Penelope choked out, trying to keep her voice steady. Derek, what are you actually saying? He finally looked up, his expression a mask of cold pity. Look at yourself, Penelope. You're heavy, fat. You take up too much space. When we go to firm dinners, people stare. I'm up for junior partner at Harrington Wealth Management, and I need a woman who looks good on my arm, not someone who embarrasses me in front of the board. The brutality of his words was a physical blow. She felt the sudden agonizing sting of tears. I supported you, she whispered, fiercely leaning forward. When you failed your licensing exam twice, I paid your rent. I fed you. I loved you. And I appreciate that. Derek sighed, signaling the waiter for the check. But gratitude isn't love. Honestly, I've already started seeing someone else. Jessica from Acquisitions. She runs marathons. She understands my lifestyle. He tossed a $100 bill onto the table, barely enough to cover his own steak, and stood up. Don't call my phone Pen. It's over. Maybe use this as a wake-up call to hit the gym. With that, he walked out, leaving Penelope completely alone in a sea of thin, beautiful, wealthy people who were now openly staring at the fat woman crying at table 4. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Penelope took a deep, shuddering breath, grabbed her coat, paid the remainder of the exorbitant bill, and walked out of the restaurant with her head held as high as she could manage. The true devastation, however, didn't hit until the next morning. Sitting in the cramped office of her bakery, Penelope opened her laptop to pay her flour suppliers. The joint savings account, the one holding the $45,000 she had painstakingly saved to open a second bakery location, was completely empty. Panic seized her chest. She refreshed the page. 0. She checked the transaction history. A single wire transfer had been made at 8 a.m. to an offshore holding account under the name Harrington Holdings, LLC. Derek hadn't just broken her heart and insulted her body. He had financially gutted her. Penelope tried to call him. Blocked. She called the police, only to be told by a weary desk sergeant that since her name was on the joint account and she had willingly given him access, it was a civil matter. It would take years and thousands of dollars in legal fees to even attempt to get it back. In the span of 24 hours, Penelope was left single, humiliated, and financially ruined. But Penelope Miller was not a woman who simply rolled over and died. If there was one thing her size had taught her, it was how to take up space and weather the judgment of the world. She wiped her tears, tied her flour-dusted apron tighter around her waist, and marched into the kitchen. She had an empire to rebuild. 6 months later, Penelope's relentless hustle had kept Crumb and Canvas afloat, but just barely. The missing $45,000 was a massive hole in her operating budget, forcing her to take on grueling high-volume catering gigs just to make payroll for her 3 employees. That was how she found herself standing in the cavernous industrial kitchen of a heavily guarded private estate on the outskirts of Chicago. The client was officially listed as Bianchi Logistics, an import-export company throwing a private gala. Unofficially, the whispers in the catering community were clear. This was a gathering of the Bianchi crime family, one of the most feared and untouchable syndicates in the Midwest. Penelope didn't care if they were the Mafia or the Pope. Their check cleared, and it was enough to cover her rent for the next 3 months. Table 7 needs another round of the dark chocolate tartlets. Penelope called out, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead. Her chef's coat was snug across her wide hips and heavy chest, but she moved with the grace of a general commanding a battlefield. Suddenly, the swinging kitchen doors crashed open. 2 men in dark, expensive suits walked in, dragging a terrified, bleeding man between them. They tossed him onto the tile floor right near Penelope's prep station. The kitchen staff froze in terror. "Hey!" Penelope shouted, her protective instincts overriding her common sense. "This is a sanitary workspace. Get him out of here." The larger of the 2 mobsters turned to her, sneering. "Shut your mouth, Baker, before I shut it for you. We got business to handle." He reached out to shove her backward, but before his hand could even brush the fabric of her coat, a voice cut through the kitchen like a crack of thunder. "Touch her, and I'll remove your arm at the shoulder." The entire room went dead silent. The mobster instantly dropped his hand, stepping back and bowing his head respectfully. Standing in the doorway was Lorenzo Bianchi. He was entirely too handsome to be a criminal. Tall, with broad shoulders, encased in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, he possessed an aura of quiet, lethal power. His dark eyes swept over the bleeding man on the floor with mild disgust before locking on to Penelope. Unlike the men in Penelope's past, Lorenzo didn't look at her with pity, disgust, or dismissal. His eyes traveled over her soft, round face, down to the full curve of her hips and back up again. The look in his eyes was raw, predatory, and undeniably appreciative. "Apologies for the mess in your kitchen, Miss Miller," Lorenzo said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. He gestured to the men. "Clean this up. Take him to the warehouse. Now." As his thugs dragged the man away, Lorenzo stepped further into the kitchen. He approached Penelope's prep station, completely ignoring the terrified whispers of the waitstaff. He dipped a single finger into a bowl of leftover raspberry coulis, tasted it, and let out a soft hum of approval. "Exceptional," he murmured, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "You work too hard, Penelope." Penelope swallowed hard, trying to slow her racing heart. "I have a business to run, Mr. Bianchi, and debts to pay." Lorenzo stepped closer, so close she could smell the intoxicating scent of bergamot and expensive bourbon on his skin. "A woman with your talent and your beauty shouldn't be slaving away over an oven to pay off debts." Penelope let out a harsh, involuntary laugh. "Beauty right. Save the charm, Mr. Bianchi. I know what I look like. I'm the caterer, not the arm candy." Lorenzo's jaw clenched. He reached out gently but firmly, grasping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "I don't deal in cheap flattery," Lorenzo said softly, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "You are magnificent. Soft, strong, and real. Whichever blind fool convinced you otherwise deserves a bullet." Penelope's breath hitched. For the first time in months, She felt a genuine blush heat her cheeks. Later that night, long after the gala had ended, and Penelope had packed up her vans, Lorenzo sat in his dimly lit mahogany office. Across the desk from him stood Matteo, his most trusted enforcer. "You asked me to look into the baker's financials, boss," Matteo said, sliding a manila folder across the polished wood. "Penelope Miller. She's underwater because a guy named Derek Harrington drained her accounts 6 months ago. Stole 45 grand. Lorenzo's eyes darkened at the name. Harrington. Why is that familiar? Matteo grinned a dangerous, sharp smile. Because Harrington is a junior partner at a wealth management firm. But he got greedy, tried to impress his new, high-maintenance girlfriend by investing in underground real estate. He borrowed from one of our shell companies. Lorenzo leaned forward, steepling his fingers. How much does the rat owe us? $500,000, and he missed his payment yesterday. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Lorenzo Bianchi's face. The man who had broken the heart of the most captivating woman Lorenzo had ever met was now entirely at his mercy. "Bring him to me," Lorenzo whispered, his voice dripping with lethal intent. "And Matteo, send 36 red roses to Crumb and Canvas tomorrow morning. Tell Miss Miller her debt is officially considered paid in full." Morning sunlight poured through the frosted glass windows of Crumb and Canvas, illuminating dancing motes of powdered sugar in the air. Penelope stood at the massive stainless steel prep table, her arms buried elbow-deep in a heavy batch of brioche dough. Her shoulders ached with a dull, persistent throb, and the thick cotton of her apron felt damp with sweat against her heavy breasts. But the physical labor was the only thing keeping her mind tethered to reality. The events of the previous night's catering gig felt like a fever dream. A mafia boss, a bleeding man on her kitchen floor, a gentle, calloused thumb brushing against her bottom lip. Penelope pushed her weight into the dough, her wide hips pressing against the edge of the metal counter. She was exhausted. The financial strain of Derek's betrayal had stretched her to her absolute physical limits. She had spent the last 6 months shrinking her life down to nothing but work, desperately trying to fill the $45,000 crater her ex-boyfriend had blasted into her life. The brass bell above the bakery door chimed loudly, shattering her thoughts. Penelope wiped her sticky hands on a towel and forced a customer service smile onto her face as she walked out to the front counter. However, there was no customer waiting for a morning croissant. Instead, a delivery courier in a crisp uniform was standing awkwardly in the center of the small shop, his face completely obscured by the most massive, ostentatious floral arrangement Penelope had ever seen in her life. It wasn't just a bouquet, it was an entire ecosystem of deep, velvety crimson. 36 rare black baccara roses, their petals so dark they almost looked like dried blood, were arranged in a heavy, custom-blown glass vase. "Delivery for Penelope Miller," the courier mumbled, struggling to balance the sheer weight of the glass. I think there's been a mistake," Penelope stammered, stepping out from behind the pastry case. "I didn't order anything, and nobody sends me flowers." "Name on the invoice is definitely Penelope Miller," the courier insisted, hastily setting the massive vase down on the nearest cafe table before she could protest further. He handed her an electronic tablet, grabbed her hurried signature, and practically sprinted out the door. Penelope approached the table cautiously, as if the roses might suddenly snap at her. The scent was intoxicating, heavy, rich, and expensive. Nestled deep within the dark, velvety petals was a thick, matte black envelope. Her flour-dusted fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it free and broke the silver wax seal on the back. Inside was a single card made of heavy cardstock, bearing an embossed silver crest. The handwriting was sharp, jagged, and unapologetically masculine. "Your business loan has been settled. The debt is paid. Take the day off, Penelope. You work too hard. LB. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She practically dove over the pastry counter to grab her laptop, her fingers fumbling over the keys as she logged into her small business banking portal. The screen loaded, and Penelope squeezed her eyes shut, terrified to look. When she finally forced them open, she let out a strangled gasp. The crippling, terrifying red numbers of her commercial credit line, the debt she had taken on just to keep the lights on after Derek emptied her accounts, were completely gone. The balance read a perfectly crisp, impossible 0. "No," Penelope whispered to the empty room. "No, no, no." She was a woman who prided herself on independence. Her fat body had made her a target for unsolicited pity and mockery her entire life, and she had built a fortress of absolute self-reliance to protect herself. She didn't take handouts. She certainly didn't take hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit mob money from a frighteningly handsome crime boss. Before she could even process the urge to call the bank and demand a reversal, the brass bell above the door chimed again. The temperature in the bakery seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lorenzo Bianchi stepped over the threshold, moving with the terrifying silent grace of an apex predator. He was dressed in a bespoke midnight blue suit that clung perfectly to his broad shoulders and narrow waist. Behind him, parked illegally on the curb, was a fleet of 3 blacked-out SUVs, flanked by men who looked like they broke legs for morning cardio. "Good morning, Penelope," Lorenzo said, his deep baritone sending a totally involuntary shiver down her spine. His dark eyes immediately locked onto hers, completely ignoring the elaborate pastries in the display case. "Mr. Bianchi," Penelope said, her voice shaking slightly. She grabbed the black card from the table and marched right up to him. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye, but she refused to back down. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I cannot accept this. I am not a charity case. I will not be bought." Lorenzo didn't flinch. He looked down at her flushed, angry face, his gaze dropping momentarily to the heavy, rapid rise and fall of her chest beneath her apron. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It isn't charity, Mia Bella," Lorenzo said softly, stepping into her personal space. The scent of bergamot and expensive leather wrapped around her. "It is restitution. The universe took something from you. I merely forced the universe to give it back. You paid off my commercial loan." Penelope hissed, acutely aware of how small the bakery suddenly felt with him inside it. "That was almost $60,000. I am a baker, Lorenzo. I make scones. I cannot owe a favor to the head of the Bianchi family." Lorenzo reached out, his large, warm hand gently wrapping around her thick forearm. His thumb stroked the soft, flour-dusted skin of her wrist. "You owe me nothing. In fact, I am here to offer you a contract, a highly lucrative catering contract for all of my corporate fronts. But we cannot discuss business in a kitchen." He stepped back, his eyes traveling over her body with that same raw, unfiltered hunger he had shown the night before. "I am sending a car for you at 7 o'clock tonight. Wear something comfortable. We have a lot to discuss." "I don't have time for a dinner date," Penelope argued, crossing her thick arms over her chest defensively. "And I certainly don't have anything suitable to wear to wherever a man like you eats." "You don't need to worry about a thing," Lorenzo replied smoothly, turning toward the door. 7 o'clock, Penelope. Do not make my driver wait." 4 hours later, a sleek black town car pulled up to her modest apartment building. The driver didn't just drop off a package. He delivered 2 massive garment bags and a set of velvet jewelry boxes directly to her door, bowing respectfully before leaving her completely bewildered in her hallway. When Penelope unzipped the primary garment bag, she actually cried. For her entire adult life, fashion had been a battlefield. Department stores banished women of her size to dark, depressing corners, filled with shapeless sacks and ugly floral prints designed to hide, minimize, and apologize for fat bodies. Derek used to constantly suggest she wear black to slim her down, openly grimacing when she wanted to wear bright colors. But Lorenzo Bianchi had not sent a tent. Lorenzo Bianchi had sent a weapon. It was a custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. It was a size 22, but the construction was unlike anything she had ever touched. The bodice was structured with hidden, flexible boning, designed to support her heavy breasts and cinch her waist, while the heavy, luxurious silk skirt was meant to drape sumptuously over her wide hips and thick thighs. It featured a daring sweetheart neckline and off-the-shoulder sleeves that exposed her soft, dimpled shoulders. When Penelope finally put it on and looked in her full-length mirror, she didn't see a woman who needed to hit the gym. She didn't see a woman who took up too much space. She saw a queen. The emerald silk practically glowed against her pale skin, and the cut of the dress celebrated every single curve roll and dip of her body. She looked powerful. She looked intensely, undeniably desirable. At exactly 7 o'clock, she walked out of her apartment building. Lorenzo was leaning against the sleek black hood of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. When he saw her, the mob boss actually stopped breathing. He froze, his dark eyes wide, looking at her as if she were a religious apparition. He didn't offer a polite compliment. He walked up to her, his chest heaving slightly, and took her hand, pressing a searingly hot kiss to her knuckles. "You are spectacular," Lorenzo murmured, his voice hoarse. "Absolutely spectacular." Penelope felt a hot flush of genuine pride. "Thank you. The dress. It's incredible. How did you even get my measurements?" Lorenzo smirked, opening the heavy car door for her. "I have a very good eye, Penelope, and a very efficient tailor." Dinner was at an underground, impossibly exclusive supper club, where the waitstaff treated Lorenzo like royalty. They sat in a private, velvet-lined booth, drinking $1,000 wine and eating truffle risotto. For the first time in years, Penelope felt completely at ease. Lorenzo didn't talk over her. He asked her about her bakery, about her passion for pastry chemistry, listening with rapt attention. As the plates were cleared, Lorenzo poured her another glass of heavy red wine and leaned back against the velvet cushions. His expression shifted from charming to dangerously serious. "I told you I was offering you a contract," Lorenzo said quietly. "But there is another reason I brought you here tonight. I told you that my money was restitution. I meant that literally." Penelope frowned, setting her glass down. "What do you mean?" Lorenzo's jaw clenched. "I run a very extensive network of financial holding companies, Penelope. High-interest, short-term lending for desperate men who cannot go to traditional banks. 6 months ago, a junior partner at a wealth management firm decided to play big shot. He wanted to impress his new marathon-running girlfriend by buying a stake in an illegal offshore casino." Penelope's blood turned to ice in her veins. She stopped breathing. Derek Horrington." Lorenzo confirmed, his voice laced with venom. "He drained your accounts of $45,000 to use as a down payment on a $500,000 loan from my organization. A loan he promised to pay back in 3 months. Lorenzo smiled, a sharp, terrifying flash of white teeth. "He defaulted. Yesterday." Penelope sat perfectly still. The man who had broken her heart, insulted her body, and ruined her life had accidentally stolen money from the most dangerous criminal syndicate in Chicago. "Where is he?" Penelope asked, her voice dropping to a low, trembling whisper. Lorenzo stood up, offering her his hand. "Come with me, Penelope. It is time for you to collect your debts. The Rolls-Royce glided through rain-slicked streets of Chicago's industrial district, pulling into a fortified shipping yard. The smell of rust and ozone hung heavy in the damp night air. Penelope's heart pounded furiously against her ribs as the car halted in front of a sprawling warehouse. Armed men in gear stepped out of the shadows, nodding respectfully as Lorenzo escorted Penelope out. Her emerald silk gown swished around her ankles, a jarring splash of vibrant color in the bleak, gritty environment. "Are you afraid?" Lorenzo asked softly, his hand resting warmly against her back as they approached the heavy steel doors. Penelope looked up at him, her jaw set tight. "No, I am just angry." Lorenzo's eyes flashed with fierce pride. "Good. Hold on to that." He pushed the heavy doors open. The inside of the warehouse was cavernous, smelling heavily of motor oil and fear. A single blindingly bright halogen light hung from the ceiling, illuminating a small patch of concrete in the center of the room. Sitting in a rusted metal chair, bound tightly with thick nylon zip ties, was Derek Harrington. Penelope gasped softly. The man sitting under the light bore almost no resemblance to the slick, arrogant executive who had dumped her. Derek's custom navy suit was ripped and stained with dirt and dark patches of blood. His face was bruised, his lips split open, and his meticulously styled hair was matted with sweat. He was shivering violently, weeping openly into his chest. Matteo Lorenzo's hulking enforcer stood quietly in the shadows behind the chair, casually tossing a heavy metal wrench from hand to hand. Lorenzo guided Penelope forward until they stood just at the edge of the harsh spotlight. The click of Penelope's heels echoed loudly through the silent warehouse. Derek's head snapped up at the sound. His swollen, bloodshot eyes frantically scanned the darkness before landing on the couple standing before him. For a long, agonizing moment, his brain simply could not process what he was seeing. He looked at Lorenzo, the terrifying phantom boss who owned his life, and then his eyes slid to the woman holding the boss's arm. He stared at the lush emerald gown, the radiant skin, the fierce, unapologetic posture. "Penelope!" Derek choked out his voice, cracking violently. "Pen, what are you doing here? How do you know this psycho?" Before Derek could even blink, Lorenzo moved. He stepped forward and backhanded Derek across the face with such devastating force that the chair tipped onto two legs before slamming back down. "You will address her as Miss Miller," Lorenzo growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. "And if you speak to her with anything less than absolute reverence again, I will have Matteo remove your tongue with pliers. Nod if you understand." Derek spat blood onto the concrete and nodded frantically. He looked back at Penelope. "Miss Miller," Derek sobbed. Please, you have to help me. They are going to kill me. Jessica left me. She took the apartment and left when the firm fired me. I have nothing. I made a mistake. Please tell him you love me." Penelope stared down at the pathetic, broken man bleeding on the floor. 6 months ago, this man had shattered her self-esteem. He had convinced her that she was too big, too fat, too embarrassing to be loved. He had made her feel small. But looking at him now, Penelope didn't feel small. She felt immense. She felt like a titan. She let go of Lorenzo's arm and took 2 deliberate steps into the spotlight. She did not try to suck in her stomach. She did not try to hide her wide hips. She stood with her shoulders thrown back, taking up as much space as humanly possible. "You told me I took up too much space, Derek," Penelope said, her voice echoing with clear authority. "You told me I embarrassed you. You stole $45,000 from my business, Derek. You stole my safety net. And then you walked into the underworld thinking you were a wolf, only to realize you are just a pathetic little mouse. She leaned down. I am fat, Derek. I am heavy. I am soft. And right now I am completely untouchable, because I built my life with my own 2 hands, while you tried to build yours by stealing from mine. Lorenzo stepped up behind her. The debt is $500,000, Harrington, Lorenzo stated coldly. Since you cannot pay, your life is now the property of the Bianchi family. Miss Miller, what is your judgment? Penelope looked at Derek. I want my $45,000 back, with interest. And as for the $500,000 he owes you, I think Derek needs to scrub the slaughterhouse floors at your plant. He will work 16-hour shifts until he has worked off every single penny. Derek screamed. Penelope, you fat bitch, call him off. Lorenzo drew a heavy pistol and pressed the barrel against Derek's forehead. Say her name again, Lorenzo whispered. Give me a reason to paint the concrete with your brains. Derek clamped his mouth shut, sobbing. Lorenzo holstered the weapon. Your carriage awaits, Miss Miller. Penelope turned and walked out. Lorenzo followed closely behind her. Outside, he pulled her near, kissing her passionately, as she finally felt entirely loved and perfectly, truly free. Did Penelope's ultimate revenge on her toxic ex leave you cheering loud? There is nothing more powerful than a woman reclaiming her true worth, especially with a ruthless mafia boss standing by her side. If you loved this dramatic tale of betrayal, karma, and dark romance, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends who love a good payback story, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life drama and stories.